A lot of people, when they're delivering a presentation, they think, what do I need to tell them? And it's not that, it's what do they need to hear? And there's a huge difference between those two.
Have you ever sat through a presentation that felt like it lasted forever, where the speaker droned on about themselves and you were secretly counting down the minutes until it was over? Yeah, we've all been there. And you know what? Maybe I've been one of those speakers over the years, but what if your presentation could captivate your audience from the very first sentence? What if you knew exactly how to structure your message so people actually listened, engaged, and remembered what you said? I'm Deirdre Martin, the host of the Master Your Business podcast. I'm a triple certified, award-winning, international best-selling author who helps entrepreneurs like you hit their first 100K or their first million by mastering their business and brand. And today we're diving deep into the world of powerful presentations with my expert guest, Maureen McCowen. Maureen is a public speaking specialist who helps business professionals and teams unlock their speaking confidence, whether it's delivering a killer pitch, speaking up in meetings, or presenting with impact. She's worked with major clients across Ireland and internationally, including Sky Ireland, Ford Via, and Hewlett Packard Financial Services. And today she's here to share her expertise with you. In this episode, you'll discover why talking about yourself too much in a presentation is a surefire way to lose your audience, the secret to structuring your talk so people stay engaged from start to finish, and the biggest mistakes speakers make and how to fix them instantly. So whether you're preparing for a keynote, a pitch, or just want to boost your confidence in speaking, this episode is packed with actionable insights to transform the way you communicate. Before we dive in, if you have a chance, please do me a favor, go ahead and rate or review the show if you've listened before, and be sure to follow us. So wherever you're listening to your podcasts, your support helps us bring even more incredible guests like Maureen and game-changing conversations your way. Now, let's get into it. Maureen McCowen, welcome to the Master Your Business podcast. Delighted to have you here.
Great to be here, Deirdre. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, well, Maureen, we were just saying before we hit record, I once delivered a presentation online 4 years ago when I started my business, and you came and we were both involved in Network Ireland. I reached out to you and I'm like, please, could I have some mentoring about my presentation and get feedback? And you gave me the most valuable feedback ever, which was about how much time I spent talking about myself. So let's not do that again, anyone. But Maureen, I brought you on today to talk about pitches and presentations and all of the things that go hand in hand with that. So where do we start, Maureen?
Where do we start? I'm going to start by going back to that piece of advice that I gave you before, and for the listeners' benefit, the why you don't talk about yourself and do the big intro. And essentially it's because people are interested in what they can learn from you. So your listeners who are tuning into this podcast now, they're giving their time, and that time is valuable. And out of all the podcasts, they're choosing that they can listen to this one. So they're looking to get some value. They're looking to learn from it. And they're definitely not looking for the resume, the CV, the whole list of achievements and accomplishments and awards and so on. That's not what people are interested in. So it's getting straight down, showing immediately that you can give them value. And when you have their attention, then you can introduce yourself, or you can weave into it about the type of work you do and how you do it. But rather than that big intro at the beginning. And very often there's an introduction by whoever is, the MC of an event or whoever's hosting the webinar. They've done the introduction for you anyway. So you shouldn't need to go and repeat it.
That makes so much sense. And it's interesting. I follow Neil Patel. I don't know if you follow him at all, but recently he published a post on attention and attention by content type. And so if you're doing a webinar or a live stream or a podcast in terms of attention type, the time frame is anything between 35 seconds and 4.45 minutes. So Yeah, to your point, if you spend all the time talking about yourself and people are there to learn things, they're like, what's in it for me? And they're
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like on Instagram stories or things like that. If you got a person who's, hi, how's everybody? I haven't been here for a while. And there's this big long rambling intro about them and their story. And I've swiped on and I'm finding that, and especially I think since COVID, my attention span just seems to have plummeted and I just don't have time for, give me the value straight away.
Makes so much sense. So let's say if I'm about to do a presentation and I want to do something that really does keep my audience engaged and interested,
Mhm.
how might I structure that?
Before you go to the structure, the first thing is to ask yourself who's the audience. So
Hmm.
finding out, doing that audience analysis. And, when we were having our chat before this, I was asking you, who's your audience? So you've told me that the profile of them, the percentage of them that are here in Ireland, but then other countries around the world that are listening in as well, so that I have that in front of mind when I'm speaking, so that I can tailor any of the responses that you have to that. So you're delivering a presentation. Who are you delivering it to? Are the people in the room potentially going to be clients of yours? Or are they going to be people who will be great for referring you on? They're not the clients themselves, but they can refer you on to other people. So, quite often you might have people who are in the alternative medicine space, health space, that type of consultancy or therapy and that type of thing. And very often when I'm talking to people like that, they think, well, there's no point in me going to a networking event where there's going to be men there because they're not my ideal client. They're not, but they've got wives, sisters, mothers, female friends. They can still refer you on. So it's thinking beyond that. But that means then that if you are speaking to a broad audience who aren't familiar with what you do, then you need to make sure that your language is accessible to them and that they understand what you're talking about, that you're not going into all this technical terminology and so on. So it's really important that you're thinking, who's going to be here? What's their reason for being here? If somebody is tuning in to a business podcast like this, then it's fair to assume that they're interested in business or they're business owners. If you're being interviewed on a national radio station, you have a whole general audience and you're tailoring your message slightly according to that. So it's thinking each time before you go near structure, who am I going to be delivering this to? Who's going to be hearing it?
I love that. But everything I talk about is about coming back to who your ideal clients are. And you've literally just outlined that that's exactly what you should do with
Mm-hmm.
presentations as well. It's so true. And then it's like, okay, so who are your ideal clients? And then start with why.
Mm-hmm.
So once you're clear on those, what do you do next?
So then you're thinking, what's the purpose of your presentation? And if I decided that I was going to be delivering a presentation where I'm going to talk to them about public speaking tips, that's huge. Where do you start? Whereas if I'm really clear in my head, okay, this is a general audience of business owners, and at the end of the presentation, I'm going to have shared 3 top tips for how to put together an effective presentation. Now I'm clear in my head where I'm going to be focusing my attention, what I'm going to be speaking about, and who I'm going to be delivering it to. And then I'm moving on, then I'm able to filter. I call it the gather and filter stage of the process where you've all of this information. You're the expert in your area, but so you can gather all of that information together, but then you need to filter it down because it's not going to be a brain dump to your audience. You need to decide what's going to be relevant to them. Filter down that information so that you're delivering the message that you've identified to the audience that's going to be listening to you. And that means that you might be tweaking your same basic presentation to different audiences, like what I mentioned earlier. So it's that little bit of planning, and it doesn't take a huge amount of time to do that. It makes a huge difference to your presentation and to the audience experience of your presentation, which is really what matters. Because a lot of people, when they're delivering a presentation, they think, what do I need to tell them? And it's not that, it's what do they need to hear? And there's
I
a
love
huge difference between those two.
Love that. What do they need to hear? Not
Mhm.
what do I need to tell them? One thing that I've found is that I'm trying to filter the message, and sometimes it's like, okay, do I do I filter it so much that then, oh, I have 60 minutes to deliver this presentation, and if I filter it so much, that's only going to take me 10 minutes. Or I can't skip that part because that's really vital. They need to know this bit too. And if I
Mhm.
include that, it's going to take 70 minutes, but I still only have 60 minutes. And then I'm like panicking over the time. So what tips do you have for that bit?
So then, when it comes to structure, 3 is the magic number when it comes to structure. If you have your 3 main points, and if you have those 3 main points, then you top and tail it with your beginning and ending. But once you know, I'm going to talk about these 3 things, you can expand that to an hour, you can contract it to 5 minutes because you know where you're going, you have your structure. If you've got your main points, you can then fill it out with more examples. If it was expanded into a workshop, you can give them exercises to do based on it. But if you've got a short window that it's a 10-minute at a local chamber event that you're the 10-minute speaker, then you're going to be giving a very edited version of that. But once you are clear, first of all, on what your core points are, then you can expand in and make it bigger, longer if that's what you need, or keep it nice and short and compact, but that the core message is still the same.
That makes so much sense. And I totally agree with you. And it actually makes it easier. I know yesterday I was even delivering an online workshop
Mhm.
and I had 3 little points. So I like go through my thing and I write down 3 little points and then I talk off the cuff. I used to script all of these online, Maureen, but now I don't. I'm like, now I'm comfortable talking off
Yeah.
the cuff. I'm not a newsreader anymore. But what I found was, and I did this yesterday, I was like, I went into so much detail on the first point because I'm like, oh, they need to know this. And as I was talking, I'm like, they also need to know this too. And then I started to tell a story. And I believe storytelling is really important in
Mm.
presentations. It can help make it more memorable. But I probably went on too long with the story. So that first point, I nearly had to cut down how much I emphasized in some of the other ones because I got carried away. So
Yeah.
and I'm sure there are people out there who do things like that with me and with the storytelling too. So how or what suggestions do you have around the storytelling bit so it doesn't get too long?
Doesn't get too long. But before that, what I would, couple of points that you've made. First of all, totally agree about not scripting it because, you know, you're the expert in your field and you are able to talk about it. You can see there, you can ad lib about it, for hours if need be. The skill is in paring it down and editing it down. So if it's a case that you've got we said that you've got a 40-minute webinar coming up and you say, right, okay, there's going to be that introduction part and, I'll get into the body of it about 7 or 8 minutes in. And then how long am I going to spend on my first point? How long on my second? How long on my third? And have that timer beside you and keep an eye on it. And you'll know, okay, I'm 25 minutes in. I should be starting into point 3 now. I need to wrap up this story, or that point isn't essential. And that can be part of your planning process as well. If you've got your 3 points, that it can be, okay, this is what the absolute must-haves are. And this is what the nice to have is. If I find that I get through it a little bit faster, then I can include this point, I can add in this story, that you're building in that flexibility. And it's much easier to plan small and have extra pieces to build in rather than thinking, oh my goodness, I'm running out of time and I still have half of my presentation to do. What am I going to do? And from, being at conferences, if you're ever asked to speak at an event or at a conference and somebody goes on way over their time, that impacts the rest of the speakers. If you're the last speaker on the day and suddenly it's like, look, would you be able to reduce your 30-minute speaking slot to 15? Well, you can only do that if you're like, okay, I can still do my 3 core points, but I can leave out that story. I can tighten that up a little bit. Yes, I can do that. Then the event organizer is going to absolutely love you because you're so accommodating. But that timing is so important. Remember, I was saying to you earlier about people are choosing to give their time, but it's really important that we respect their time as speakers as well. and that we know if we've got a half an hour slot, that we're finished within half an hour. A client comes to me and they say, I've got a speaking slot of 40 minutes. And first question I'll say is Q&A included in that, or is it after? And usually people don't know. So then I said, go back and find out, because that's really important. Because if you've got a 40-minute speaking slot and that's including Q&A, then you've got a 30-minute time for your talk, which means that we're really going to be aiming at you having that talk completed in about 27, 28 minutes to allow the wiggle room. Because you know yourself, at a lot of these events, the Q&A is where there's real value for people and where you can really help them and really showcase your expertise. So that's from that timing side of things. Back to the question that you had there about storytelling. And I was listening to somebody telling a story. It was at a networking event recently, and the story made a very valuable point, but there was so much fluff in the story that by the time the point was made, I'd lost interest, because it was just so much detail. So, and I know that you're a big fan of Donald Miller and the Story Brand and so on, and it's fantastic, one of the books that I go back to again and again. The key thing for storytelling, people feel very often, oh, everybody loves stories. They don't. They love stories that they can relate to. They can love stories where they can find the message in it themselves. So if I'm telling a story, why should the audience care? First and foremost, why should they care? And if they don't care about it, then it's not going to be effective, and it's definitely not going to be memorable.
So true. Every bit of that. So true. And to go back to the thing, that happened to me last year where I was the last speaker at an event and somebody was like, Deirdre, we're out of time. Can you do your 45-minute talk in 20 minutes? And I'm like, oh, can I? Yes, I can. And it was horrible then because it was already late. And even to cut it to 20 minutes, it was 20 minutes past the time. People were leaving. It felt horrible as a speaker to be in that position as well.
Yeah.
And I remember actually the year before last, I was speaking at a thing as well. And I was the first speaker, but I was so nervous. They didn't tell me what time I was going to be speaking at. I just come in the door and they're like, you're straight up. And I'm like, oh, I am. Oh, crap. And I practically shit myself on the stage. And then I spoke so quickly. It was over so fast. But actually, to your point, Maureen, the Q&A then, we had way more time for the Q&A, and the Q&A was gold. And people were like, it was rapid fire questions. It was amazing. It was so valuable.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting. And so what I'm hearing with the story bit as well, I think you need to be prepared for those things to happen. And I think for me, I've learned that with experience now from doing it, but I wouldn't have known that before those things happened. So I think there's learning in that. That's the point of my story and sharing those.
Yes.
Definitely preparation. And I think what I'm hearing from everything you've said so far is the planning. All of this is really planning. It's planning who are your ideal clients? Why are you sharing what you're going to share? What's the purpose of the presentation? It's the message that they need to hear, not you. Filtering that down into 3 points, setting timers for how long each of those things are going to take, and maybe identifying which stories that you can tell concisely throughout. And that last point you made was around the emotional level. Totally agree. And yes, Donald Miller, very good at bringing in the empathy piece and building the rapport with people. And that's exactly what we help people do. That's neuroscience, it's neuromarketing. It's really highly effective. And that leads me into the question that I really want to ask you to do with this is that in the preparation and the planning, sometimes a picture can tell 1,000 words. And so what I'm wondering is how important is it to incorporate visuals or videos and things like that in a presentation? Do you need them? Do you not need them? Because that comes back to planning and it can be hit on the emotional side too.
Yeah. And do you need them? It's one of the first questions that I would always ask people when it comes to slides, because people feel very often a presentation, oh, that's the slide deck. Their preparation for a presentation is open the laptop, open up their slide deck and start populating it and work from there. Whereas I would always recommend the reverse, that you do your planning first. So if I've got a new talk coming up and I have decided who my audience is, what my message is, I've done my brain dump down on a piece of paper, I've filtered out what's going to be relevant, I've grouped them into my 3 key categories that I'm going to be talking about, I do my very bullet point rough outline of the speech, and then I take a look and I see, okay, where do I build in audience interaction? Where do I have a slide that's going to make sense here, that's going to be valuable to what we're talking about? And it's bearing in mind if it's a short presentation, if I've only got, 5, 6, 7 minutes of a presentation, then I can very easily manage without slides. If it's longer, the slides are for the audience benefit, because we need to remember that people learn in different ways. And if you have visual learners, then you're going to need that slide, and it might have that 75% figure that you have as a percentage that you're talking about, but that they can visually see it and it will help them to remember it afterwards. The slides aren't there for the speaker. They're not your speaker crutch, your notes. It's not to help you get through your presentation. The slides are there to help the audience. So I could put up, a cute photograph of my dog, but that's not having any benefit. What's the point of the picture that's there? And talking of dog, I did have a photograph of my dog when she was jumping into the canal. It was her first time ever as a young puppy jumping into the canal to swim. And she had been mustering up her courage before that and walking up and down the canal bank until eventually she made the leap. Now, that picture of my dog was making a point, and I was relating it to people who make that leap to look for help with their public speaking. The picture now has relevance. It's like your stories that we're talking about. Cute picture by itself, yeah, that's nice, but it's not serving any purpose. So it's for all of your visuals, it's planning those out the same way as you're planning your speech. So I was working with a client yesterday, and she's going to be speaking at a conference, and it's quite technical and all of what's there. And we're looking to see, well, what way is she going to open it to get people's attention? And I was suggesting different options. They weren't really landing with her because she's not comfortable public speaking. So doing something dramatic was not her style. So that's just going to cause her so much stress if she has to do a dramatic opening. And I said to her, well, you could start with a relevant quote. Immediately, she had the exact quote that she said, yes, I could start with this. I said, okay. One way that you could start with that quote is have it at the very opening of your presentation, have it on a slide really big so everybody can see it, and just say, I'm going to let you read that. Because rather than her reading out the quote to them and then passing on, giving people a moment to read it and absorb it is going to make that quote stick with them that little bit more. And from there, again, the quote is in isolation is pointless. Then it's building that in to why she chose that quote, why it's relevant to what she's talking about, and having that as an introduction to get their attention. And I was so thrilled because she said, I'm so excited to get off this call to start putting all these things into action. And it's simple changes. I don't come in, if somebody comes to me with a prepared presentation, I don't come in and hack their presentation to bits, but it could be, take that out. How about we move this around here? How about you start it slightly differently? And it's small tweaks, because ultimately the client that I'm working with has to feel comfortable delivering that presentation. Otherwise, if you have them doing something that's not within their, you're pushing them that little bit, but if it's too far outside their comfort zone and they're already nervous about public speaking, it is going to be a disaster. So you want them to have that little bit of a stretch, do something that's a little bit different to what they've done before. It doesn't have to be huge. And quite often within organizations, I get quite a lot of clients who are in the finance area or technical area, and they're not comfortable delivering to the board and that type of thing. But it's getting small tweaks to make what they're saying a little bit more interesting and engaging for the audience. And it's finding how to do that. And when you do, it's brilliant. And you can see the confidence grow when someone is like, oh, yeah, I never thought of doing it that way. I could try that, and I'm able to do that.
Ooh.
And then, you build on that then.
I got a chill when you said about the quote. I'm like, I literally, like, I could feel my body going, ooh. Just, I'll let you read that. When you said that, it was like,
Mm,
ooh, I could feel the change in my body. And even when you said that, I'm like, dramatic openings, Maureen, give us some more examples of dramatic openings. Because I think for the dramatic openings, it's making people feel something, right?
mm,
So, and Maya Angelou's famous saying, I totally butchered this yesterday. I'm probably going to butcher it again now, but people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel.
exactly. Exactly. And it's, it could be as simple as using the word imagine. So if I said to you, Deirdre, imagine that you won the lotto, you've won 15 million euro. What would you like to do? And I pause because I have to pause to allow your imagination to go off into what you're going to do with it. And then I pull you back and I have to make it relevant to the point that I'm doing. But that imagine can be in a whole range of things, depending on what your, who it is that you're addressing, what the point is of the presentation that you're doing. So supposing that you're saying, imagine that, I'm sure a lot of you here have had a broken night's sleep. Could be because you were ill or there was a family member ill or you were up and down regularly and you've broken night's sleep. Imagine having a broken night's sleep every night for 15 years. Pause. So what I've done there, I've pulled it into something that people can relate to. And then I'm expanding it. But that pause is essential because you really need people to get into it. Whereas if I just kept talking and say, well, that was the case with my client and blah, blah, blah. If I jump into that too fast, people can't connect with it. So I do need to allow that pause. And if you're not comfortable, because a lot of people feel after be speaking all the time, they're not comfortable with the pause. When you're practicing it, that you practice it, that you're saying it slowly, and at the end of it, that you count in your head 1, 2, and then move in. So that's an example that you could do. You could, so you could be telling a client story. It could be a challenge that a client has had, that they've had this particular issue, and that this has been an ongoing problem for them. But you're bringing the audience in that they can see how it was impacting them. So client stories are so powerful because what you can do on that, you could outline what the problem is. And you've got a number of ways to do it. You could build your entire presentation around the way that you worked with that client, showing what your methodology is and so on. So you could have the entire presentation as a case study, if you like, that you've expanded. Or you could outline the problem and pause and say, we'll get back to that in a while. But first, let me take you to blah, blah, blah. And then I'm moving into the more maybe teaching side of what I'm talking about. And then I'm returning back saying, remember at the start, and I was speaking to you about give the client a name because it makes much more sense. You say, I was telling you about Deirdre rather than I was telling you about the client of mine. Remember I was telling you about Deirdre at the beginning and she hadn't slept properly in 15 years. Well, let me tell you what I did there, how we worked together. And you're giving so much value to people there. They're relating to it. It might not be something they've experienced, but they might be thinking at the end of it, so a friend of mine really needs to talk to her. And that's what you want.
Impact,
Mm-hmm.
powerful. Ooh, and do it off the bat. Amazing. I love that tip, Maureen. That's gold. I'm taking that one. Thank you so much. Sticking a pin in that. So let's talk a little bit about online presentations and the difference between online and offline presentations and things that people need to consider.
Yeah, so one of the things to consider is, let's go back to your slides first of all, because you don't know where the audience are tuning in from. They could be on their phone. They might have a huge screen in front of them. So your slide deck could be completely irrelevant, and especially if you've got small text on it. There's an exercise that I do with clients when I'm doing in-house training, and I put up a slide with 3 different font sizes on it, and I ask them to guess what the font sizes are. And typically, they will say about 24 for the largest down to maybe about 8 for the smallest, sometimes even 6 for the smallest. In reality, my smallest on that slide is 18 and the largest is 90, and it is always underestimated. So, we're putting our slides together. We think, yeah, that's good and big. I've done, I usually do size 12 and this is size 16. That's fine. It's not. You need, if you're writing on your slide, it needs to be really big and really accessible for people. And it is that idea of, can I manage without the slides? Do I need the slides? Are they supporting what I'm saying? Bearing in mind that people might not be able to tune in, that they might not be able to see the slides properly where they are. Quite often people might have it on in the background while they're preparing dinner, while they're driving the car. There's a whole range of things that are there. And it's also back to that idea that, particularly at the start of COVID, it was like everybody has to have their cameras on, have to have cameras on. It's not always practical for a number of reasons. I mean, for neurodivergent reasons, it can be very stressful for people to have their cameras on and find, themselves in that situation. So we have to be aware of all of those. When you're presenting to a blank screen or lots of cameras off, and I'm sure you've done that as well, it is really challenging because you're speaking to yourself. So you have to bring that extra energy. When you're in a room full of people, there's the buzz, there's the energy that's there. When it's online, you have to bring that extra energy. And it's making sure that you do. If I'm speaking and it's just like a normal, relaxed way, very conversation, people are switching off. So you have to bring that extra bit of energy. Again, keeping in mind take your own normal level and up it a little bit. I'm not asking you to become somebody different or somebody new, but your purpose is to keep people's attention. So your voice is going to help you do that. Lots of vocal variety is going to help you do that. Keeping relevant, interesting segments, not going too deep into detail, and being aware that people's attention span can be quite low. So if you're delivering a longer presentation, or if it's a webinar, if it's a training session, for example, that you're doing that's 3 hours, well, then you need to be building in breaks every 40, 50 minutes there. It could be just 5 minutes, stretch the legs, come back. People need those breaks. So it's being conscious back to the audience all of the time. It's number one.
Great advice and tips in that as well. And for the online stuff, Maureen, what tools or technologies do you recommend that people use? Are there specific ones in your toolkit?
So, well, I suppose it depends on what people are trying to achieve. So for engagement, interaction, I find Menti is very useful. But it can be awkward to set up. If you're going to put up a Menti poll, build 5 minutes into your presentation extra for that. So if I've only got a half an hour time slot, I'm not going to use Menti. It could be put an answer into a chat. Do what is easy. Avoid having engagement for the sake of engagement. I'm not into this, if you agree with me, put yes in the chat type of thing, because that's not engagement. Similarly, if you're in a room and you have, you say, show of hands, how many people have ever, and you're showing hands and you go, all right, I'm not giving any information to people. That's no benefit. Whereas if I say, how many people here have ever experienced, and we have a show of hands, and I give the feedback to the audience, say, okay, that's about 75% of you. Now there was a purpose in me putting up my hand. So it's always thinking of the purpose of what you're using. So, keeping any of the tools that you use, if it is Menti or if you've got Kahoot, which is great if you want to gamify things, they're gimmicks and they can add, but they're not going to add value. You're adding the value. And it's thinking, what's the point of me doing this? And what's the purpose of me doing this? And for shorter presentations, then you're really keeping it very simple and straightforward.
Fantastic tips and tools. And actually, I did that this week. I'm like, show me your hands. And people put their hands up. But I didn't say, that's about however many of you. That's another one I'm taking, Maureen. Thank
There you
you.
go.
This is
Yeah.
like another personal mentoring session by Maureen. You're super. So, Maureen, some of the other things I'm wondering is, right, you've mentioned COVID a few times, but we're a few years on from COVID, and
Mm.
I'm curious, like, what are some current trends in presentations and public speaking? And, have we moved on since some of the COVID stuff, or are things the same? Are there new trends, basically?
I suppose, COVID was a changing point for everything because everybody moved online and became much more comfortable online eventually, So, but the impact of that, then the other side, and what I'm seeing a lot is as people are going back into offices and back into in-person presentations, their stress levels, anxiety levels are hugely increasing because they can no longer have all of the notes around them. They don't have that security blanket that's there. They've got all eyes on them instead. So you have that's going to be a change that's there, from technology point of view. And I know you're a big fan of AI, Deirdre, and I would use it myself a lot. I would use ChatGPT a lot for brainstorming and for getting ideas and here's a good tip for you. If I put it down into ChatGPT, I'm going to be delivering a presentation on this particular topic. I write out what the audience profile is, and then it could be, what questions would they have? So then I'm getting in advance. So if I've a good idea of the audience profile, I've given the information as to what I'm going to be speaking about, but then I'm asking in advance, what are the type of questions that they have, or what else might they be wondering that I haven't covered here? Where are the gaps? So there are so many ways that we can use the tools. If I go in and ask it to prepare a speech for me or prepare a presentation, yes, it will, but it's not going to have that individual flavor that each of us has when we're delivering our speeches and presentations. It's like for LinkedIn posts. If I went in and asked ChatGPT to put, 5 tips together, it will give me tips that are excellent. But the value that I bring to the tips is where I'm able to personalize them with stories. You're the same. Every listener here is the same. Where you're bringing the value is your extra piece of knowledge, of expertise, of experience that you're bringing to those basic tips. Because let's face it, there's very little that's not out there already in the world. If you go onto YouTube and put in presentation tips, you are going to get thousands and thousands of videos. And they're all going to be giving more or less the same tips. I don't have any magic formulas, but it's the way that you deliver it that's different. That's back to our storytelling and where that can come in. And when we're using tools and technology, how we're using those as well. And I have just finished reading Good to Great, only finally got to read Good to Great with Jim Collins. And he has, even though the book was written back in 2001, but he's talking about technology and talking about it as a tool. And it's like, it's not going to grow your business, but it will help to accelerate the growth. And that's the same if we're talking about presentations, delivering presentations online. What technology are you using? You focus on that after everything else is done. What are my slides? What do I need technology? Do I need interaction here? What's that going to look like?
Great book, by the way, Jim
Yeah,
Collins,
super.
getting everybody on the bus. And I regularly refer to it as well, actually, with clients. Great book. Good to
Mm.
Great by Jim Collins. If you didn't catch it, folks, do go and check it out. It's an oldie but a goodie. So that is some great tips in what you've just said there as well, Maureen. And I think with the in person and the sticky notes and all of that sort of stuff, like if you're in presentation mode, you can be in presentation mode and delivering an online presentation and have your notes on your screen, but you can't do that when you're in person. And it's like,
Yeah,
and it
yeah,
is scary. I find that as well. I'm so much more comfortable delivering online than I am in person for that reason. It's the
yeah.
notes. And I think like one of the things that I'm curious about as well is with presentations, like a lot of listeners, I know we'd said we were going to talk about presentations and pitches, but there's been so much value in this. We might have to get you back at a later date to come and talk about
Absolutely.
pitches. But let's say with the presentations, some of the listeners here today might be asked to go and do a keynote speech, or they might be asked to present. Maybe they're applying for funding for something, or they're looking to get investors in. And those are all presentation. So
Mhm.
in terms of tips for a presentation that gets results, what
Mm.
would yours be?
Then it is back to what does the audience need to hear. So if you're pitching for funding, for example, I was working with a client last year who was in a major national pitch competition. And the thing was, it's looking to see, well, yes, you're completely passionate about this. You've put heart and soul into it for so long. Me standing up and saying, I'm really passionate about this and this is brilliant, isn't going to win any pitch competition, because you really need to outline what the problem is, how you're solving the problem, why it's different, and why, if it's an investor, for example, why this is a good investment. And it's looking at it, usually if it is a pitch competition, you've got your marking scheme. So my background is secondary teaching, so I'm all about the marking scheme and the scores and knowing what's what. But it is checking that marking scheme to see, are you ticking the boxes of what they're actually looking for? If it's pitching for an investment, put yourself into that investor's shoes. They're hearing pitches all of the time from people who have wonderful products that they're totally passionate about. Why should they invest in yours? And that's a big part of it. It's back to that idea of when you are speaking, you're selling yourself, you're selling your business, regardless of what the format is going to be. Can you explain what you want to do clearly and concisely? And if not, you need to go away and explain it clearly and concisely. That client that I was talking about, I asked him, what was his, it was a tech product and it was completely over my head. I didn't get it. And I had to keep probing and keep asking questions until eventually he said, well, it's like this. And he outlined a very simple scenario that I understood. And he said, and we do that for this particular industry. I was like, oh, now I get it. Now it makes sense. And it's the same, your investors, your audience aren't necessarily going to be experts in that area. So you need to bring it down to something that's really simple. They get what it is. They understand what the problem is and why it's a problem. Let's go back to that sleep example that I was talking about earlier. So, if I said you've broken sleep and then I expanded it, and imagine that for 15 years. But now I might need to dig a little bit deeper. Imagine the implication that that has on your health. Health experts say that blah, blah, blah. And I've got a statistic to back up what I'm saying. And then I'm, talking about relationships and I talk about the different impacts. Now I'm really showing why this is a problem. And then you're going from there, why it can be solved, how you're the person to solve it, and why you're a good person for them to invest their time in, their money in, and to move things to the next stage. And that's ultimately what you need to do. But if people don't understand that this is a problem or that it's an issue, they're not going to do anything about it.
That makes so much sense. And I love what you just described there with that tech company. It's like, and pitches for Hollywood. What was it? Alien, the movie. It was like, this is like, think Jaws in space.
Mm.
It's if they can't visualize something, it's a great way to help people understand what it's like. So great
Yeah.
tip there. Maureen, I would keep you on all day because you've got so many useful nuggets, but I won't do that to you, our listeners. And I get to this stage when I'm having really enjoyable chats with our guests. So there you go. But one thing the final thing I want to ask you, other than what's coming up for you in the coming weeks and months, is if I'm bottling it before I go to do my presentation, what kind of affirmations or mental strategies could I lean into to help me boost my confidence?
One thing, and it has been called a game changer by more than one person, and it is very simply stop focusing on yourself and start focusing on your audience. That's first and foremost, and even yesterday, a client said to me, I'd never thought about it from what the audience need to hear. I've always thought about it as to what I'm trying to say to them. So it's like if I put that time and effort into making this as easy to understand as possible for the audience, that is taking my focus away from me, because we get very wrapped up in ourselves. I'm so nervous. What if I make a mistake? What if I this? What if and I'm all focused on myself. switch that around. How can I make this concept easy for them to understand? How can I make myself easy to refer if I'm showcasing what my business is? But that idea of what if I make a mistake? So what? Deirdre, if we went back over this, I'm sure both of us have made mistakes and slip-ups and so on as we're speaking here today. It happens all of the time. We don't have to be perfect. You were talking earlier about having the script, and when you were reading the script, it would have sounded perfect, but it's not going to have that real human connection. It's not going to be authentic sounding. Whereas if I'm in the middle of speaking and suddenly I say, oh, and by the way, I must get back to that afterwards. There's another point I have to say to you, and then I continue. That's connecting with people. It's normal conversation. So that idea of having to be perfect every time we stand up to speak, that's just a stick to beat ourselves with, and it can cause so much harm. So that's definitely some of the things that are really important. Don't underestimate the importance of breathing, that deep diaphragm breathing. Even before we came on here this morning, I logged on and I took a couple of minutes and I just calmed myself and I did my breaths so that I was focused and ready to go. And it is taking that moment of breathing. And when I say to take a deep breath, people usually go, oh, up here into the chest, but it's right down. It's that diaphragm breathing, because it will calm your nervous system down. It'll slow you down. It will slow your speech down. And when we're nervous, we speak quickly. You mentioned that earlier. It will just help you to sound more in control. When we're nervous, we speak quickly. If I'm speaking quickly, I sound like I'm running out of breath and I have that panicky feel about me. If I slow it down, I immediately sound like I've got much more authority and I know what I'm talking about. So breathing, really important. And you'd mentioned visualization there. Visualize. I'm a firm believer in that as well, that you visualize exactly what you're going to be wearing, what the room's going to be like, where you're going to be sitting, for example, how you're going to stand up if it's on a stage, how you're going to stand up on stage, if it's an online event, where you're going to be, what's going to look like. Visualizing if there's an audience in the room, that they're looking up at you and they're nodding and, receptive to what you're saying. All of those things can help to put you in the right frame of mind. But you have to do the prep beforehand, because otherwise everything else is going to fall apart.
Maureen, oh my gosh, so much gold in everything you've said today. And I think my biggest takeaway is that the perfect presentation comes back to the planning. And there is no such thing as perfect. That's the other bit.
Yeah.
Amazing. Maureen, thank you so much. Do tell us what's coming up for you. Where can people find you? All that stuff.
So where people can find me, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I share a lot of tips on LinkedIn. So that's Maureen McCowen. My website is softskillsuccess.ie. And if you're interested in getting an audience analysis checklist, if you go to softskillsuccess.ie/audience, then there's a checklist there that guide down. It's quite comprehensive. You don't need every category that's there every single time, but a quick glance over it might help you to think about who it is that you're going to be presenting to.
Fantastic. Be sure and go and download that from Maureen, and you will be absolutely guaranteed your next presentation will be epic. What a pleasure it has been to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been great, Deirdre. I really love the chat. Thanks for inviting me on. Take care.
Thank you. Whew, that episode was packed with gold. Let's do a quick recap of what Maureen just dropped, aside from the mic. First, your audience doesn't want your life story. They want to know what's in it for them. So go straight to the value. Second, structure is everything. Stick to 3 main points and you can expand or contract your talk depending on the amount of time that you have. And third, if you ever get asked to cut your presentation time in half on the spot, it happens. Knowing your key points and having a flexible structure will save you. And let's not forget the golden rule. Focus less on yourself and more on making your messaging clear and relevant for your audience. Now, don't just listen and move on. Take action. Grab Maureen's audience analysis checklist at softskillsuccess.ie/audience to make sure your presentation hits the mark. And if this episode gave you even one aha moment, then do me a solid. Share it. Share it to a friend or post about it on social media. Let's spread the power of confident speaking. Finally, again, a reminder, please be sure to rate, review and follow the show so you never miss an episode filled with insights to help you master your business. Until next time, keep showing up, keep speaking up, and keep mastering your business.